Welcome, everyone. I am going to open the meeting, call the meeting to order of the City of Springfield Budget Committee. For members of the public who are just joining us online, I would like to remind you that you will remain muted until the agenda item for business from the audience. If you are joining us online and wish to speak during the agenda item for business from the audience, please indicate a desire to speak by clicking the raise your hand button in the GoToWebinar. When it is your turn to provide comment, the organizer will unmute you and you will be asked to provide your name and address and will be limited to 3 minutes. For people providing written comment via email, those comments will be read by staff after the verbal comment. For people who have pre-scheduled times to call in by phone, staff will call your phone number and connect via speakerphone. So now I think it's time for the roll call.
Luke Lundberg.
Here.
Councillor Van Gordon.
Here.
George Jesse. Councillor Moe.
Here.
Corey Rodley.
Here.
Councillor Moore.
Here.
Gabriela Gudero.
Present.
Councillor Stair.
Here.
Holly Bauer Shaper.
Here.
Councillor Woodrow.
Here.
Paul Selby.
Here.
Councillor Pictionary.
Here.
And I'll go back to George Jesse.
I'm here.
That's everyone.
Wonderful, thank you. So as I am the leftover vice chair from last year, we are now going to elect a chairperson and a vice chairperson for this year's budget process. I'd like to ask for nominations for a chair. Councillor Van Gordon, go ahead.
I nominate Councillor Pictionary.
I second.
Are there any other nominations?
I nominate Councillor, I nominate Corey Rodley. This is letter Stair.
Thank you, Councillor Stair. Is there a second?
I second. This is Sherry. Sorry.
Are there? Thank you. Are there any other nominations? I hear someone's chime. All right, so we will first do Councillor Pictionary. All those in favor, maybe we should, let's start with I. Let's start there.
Let's do a roll call, Corey, if you don't mind.
Okay, thank you. Is there somebody there who will call them, or do I need to call them?
Do you have a list of all the names?
This is Neil.
Yeah.
I can, oh, sorry.
I do.
Okay.
Either way is fine with me.
You call him, Corey.
Okay. All right. So, all in favor of Councillor Pictionary serving as the chair of the Budget Committee for this year? Let's start with Luke Lundberg.
Aye.
Councillor Van Gordon.
Aye.
George Jesse.
Aye.
Councillor Moe.
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Moore.
No.
Gabriela Gudero.
Aye.
Councillor Stair.
No.
Holly Bauer Shaper.
No.
Councillor Woodrow.
Aye.
Paul Selby.
Aye.
Counselor Pictionary,
Aye.
and then me. I'm going to abstain if that's possible. So what's our number?
You would be at 8 for Counselor Pictionary.
Okay, and that's a majority, right?
That's the majority.
Okay. So let's then, Counselor Pictionary now gets to take over as chair.
Actually, why don't you finish the vice chair nomination,
Okay.
and afterwards he'll take over.
All right. I'm so ready to pass it on. All right. I'd like to ask for nominations for vice chair for this year's budget committee.
So this is Sherry. May I nominate Corey for vice chair?
Is there a second?
So Leonard's chair, I second the nomination.
Are there any other nominations?
I'd like to make a nomination.
Go ahead.
I'd like to nominate Luke Lundberg for vice chair.
Second. That was Gabriella.
Were you a second, Gabriella?
I was, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other nominations? All right, hearing none. Let's do the roll call again. Let's start with me. Let's start with Corey Rodley as vice chair. Luke Lundberg.
Aye. Sorry.
Counselor-
Hold on. Sorry about that. So that was just confusing wording. So this is voting for you?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I'll say no to that. Sorry about that. That was my mistake.
All right. Counselor Van Gordon.
No.
George Jesse.
Aye.
Counselor Moe.
Yes.
Counselor Moore.
Yes.
Gabrielle Gudero.
Aye.
Counselor Stair.
Aye.
Holly Bauer Shaper.
Aye.
Crap, I'm getting confused on who we're voting
Yeah.
for. I'm so
Same here.
sorry.
It's okay. We're voting. It's confusing because we have multiple people. So we're voting for vice chair, and my name is the name that is on the table.
I'm sorry. I would like to retract that and say no.
So,
All right.
Corey, could I,
What?
just so everyone's clear on this, maybe it might be easier to go through this again and just have them state the individual they want to vote for.
Whichever way works best for you all. Do you want me to
Okay.
start
That might
over?
be- Yeah, that might be clearer for folks.
Okay.
They just can say the name of the individual they would like in vice chair.
I think it's hard when people can't see each other. All right, so we're going to start over. The two names on the docket are Luke Lundberg for vice chair and myself, Corey Rodley. All right, so Luke Lundberg.
I will vote for myself, Luke Lundberg.
All right, Counselor Van Gordon.
Luke Lundberg.
George Jesse.
Rodley.
Counselor Moe.
Corey.
I don't know if we heard you. Okay, thanks, Counselor Moe. Counselor Moore.
Corey?
Gabrielle Gudero.
Mr. Lundberg?
Counselor Stair.
Ms. Rodley.
Holly Bauer Shaper.
Lori Rodley.
Counselor Woodrow.
Luke Lundberg?
Paul Selby.
Corey Rodley.
Counselor Pictionary.
Luke Lundberg.
And myself, I'm going to vote for myself. So what do our numbers look like?
7 votes for Corey, 5 votes for Luke. So the vote for Corey carries.
All right, now do I get to pass it over to Counselor Pictionary?
You sure can.
Awesome, it's official. Thank you for helping us keep that on the up and up.
Thank you, Corey. So I would like to go ahead and open up the meeting with some opening remarks from the city manager.
Okay, can you all see me? Can you hear
Yes.
me?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Mayor Lumber, Council, and Budget Committee members, thank you for giving your time to be online this evening. It is an honor to come before you, albeit through electronic means, to present the City of Springfield's fiscal year 2021 budget. This is my third week on the job and my first opportunity to address the Council and Budget Committee. We are truly in unprecedented times, and while I wish the message I am going to deliver tonight was more positive, I know that the Springfield community has the determination and leadership to meet the challenges in our path. City staff began working on the budget in the late fall of 2019 under the leadership of Mary Bridget Smith, City Manager Pro Tem, and was essentially completed in early March of 2020. In January, news outlets began reporting of a severe virus in Wuhan, China that we now know as COVID-19. On March 16th, Council issued an emergency declaration and Springfield activated our Emergency Operations Center. On March 23rd, Governor Kate Brown issued an executive order directing all Oregonians to stay at home unless absolutely necessary in order to reduce the spread of COVID-19. The budget you are presented with tonight was completed prior to Governor Brown's executive order. We know that, bless you, we know that COVID-19 will have a significant impact on our local economy, but the magnitude of that impact is yet to be determined. The budget team discussed whether or not to try to update this budget with estimates on the impacts of revenues and corresponding cuts to expenditures, and determined that it was too early in the event to make sound estimates and adjustments. In reality, we would be most likely repeating that effort again when we had a better understanding of COVID-19. Therefore, the decision was made to submit the budget as originally completed without adjustments made for the impact of COVID-19, with the understanding that the Budget Committee would be brought together again and presented with projections on the impact of COVID-19 on city revenues and a list of potential expenditure reductions to offset any revenue reductions. This budget contains additions that may no longer be feasible in light of COVID-19. We recognize the significance of this global pandemic and are reviewing our options regularly, both in budget team meetings and with the executive team. Staff has already been reaching out to subject matter experts and peers to assess the impact of COVID-19 on different areas of this organization. Our goal is to work with the finance team to review and revise revenue projections with the intent to bring the Budget Committee back together perhaps as early as mid-June. During that time, we will have updated revenue projections and a comprehensive list of proposed adjustments to rebalance the budget for what we now know will be a challenging time ahead. In all likelihood, when we reconvene, we will need to make reductions to this proposed budget. When we look at potential program reductions, one approach is to ask the following questions. Is the program or service legally mandated to continue? Is the program related to health and life safety? Does the service program or project bring its own revenue? Is there another agency ready, willing, and able to take over the service and/or program? And could a partnership be developed with public, private, or nonprofit sectors to deliver the service? It is my understanding that the city has already done a significant amount of cost-cutting measures, which is very commendable. In addition to the looming impact of COVID-19, our budget work has revealed that there is a structural imbalance in the general fund in that revenues coming in do not keep pace with current and projected future expenses. One example is the cost of wages and benefits. Increases to fringe benefits costs have largely been driven by the cost of the public employees' retirement system. PERS contributions are projected to increase approximately 3.2% in fiscal year 2021, which is relatively modest. However, they are projected to have another significant increase in fiscal year 2022 of approximately 20%. We have established some reserves for projected PERS cost increases, but the challenge of rising costs will remain. There are some positive impacts of the proposed budget that we are bringing forward. One is the proposal to address the backlog of street preservation in Springfield. The City Council approved the proposal and a non-general fund package totaling $775,000 in FTE and materials that is included in the fiscal year 2021 budget. The city is also preparing a federal grant application through the Better Utilizing Investments to Leverage Development or BUILD program with Eugene as co-applicant to request $25 million in BUILD funds for the construction of the next phase of Franklin Boulevard. Although admittedly this is a highly competitive grant, if Springfield were selected, our local match requirement would be $3 million, which we would propose to draw from transportation SDC and stormwater capital reserves. Over the past 3 weeks, I've met with city leadership, department directors, and some of our staff on a virtual platform. I've been incredibly impressed with the talent, creativity, and enthusiasm of the staff and the dedication of the elected leadership. I want to thank everyone I have met thus far who has given me such a warm welcome in their total support. I also want to send special thanks to our first responders and police and fire who are out in the field amid this pandemic. I would also like to thank Nathan Bell, Neil Oberger, and Neil Ladati for the critical role they have played in the preparation of this budget. Finally, I want to thank Mary Bridget Smith for her leadership over the previous year and the impact she had on this budget. I am fortunate to be coming into an organization that has been under her helm with the support of our executive team. And this concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions for our new city manager? Okay, so thank you very much. And any questions at all regarding the budget for, let's see here. You have any questions for staff or any questions for the, let's see, we gotta go, I'm sorry, people. Nate?
Yes, Councilor Piscinari. We'll have opportunities for questions from the staff a little later, and I'll cover that in my presentation.
So the memo is a little bit difficult. So we got, we need to go into the introduction of the budget, and that should be you, right?
That is correct.
Okay, let's go for that.
Excellent. Welcome again. For those who are just joining for the city's budget committee meeting, I'm Nathan Bell. I'm the city's finance director. This is the process that sets the appropriation and allows our city to operate beginning on July 1st. As I go through my slide deck, feel free to ask questions throughout. I want this to be a conversation. Again, as a reminder, if you have questions, turn on your camera. The chair will call on you when you're done asking your question, if you can turn your camera back off. I'm not going to spend any time on the bylaws. That was included as part of the proposed budget, and I will assume that everyone has read through that. This first slide is our schedule for the evening. It's a high-level schedule. We're at the point of the budget overview. The slide deck that I'm presenting, it's going to be a familiar slide deck. It's the same one as last year, and why I'm staying with it and will stay with it in future years is it provides for a nice kind of launching pad for that 30,000-foot conversation talking about the fiscal health of the organization. And it also gives, I think, good context to the environment and our approach to putting the budget together. I am going to go through it a little faster than I normally would so that we can get to the point of questions, because I know that there's a lot of questions out there. We're already seeing that from questions that have been submitted, and I think that the city manager referenced COVID-19, and I think there's a lot of anxiety and questions surrounding that. So I want to provide that opportunity. Let's see, questions on the proposed budget. That is the point where we used to have the department presentations. I think most of you are aware that we did video recordings of the department presentations and made them available online for you to watch ahead of this meeting. But the department heads are all attending. They're attending as attendees. Unfortunately, with GoToWebinar, we have only so many spots for panelists, and we couldn't bring them all on as panelists. When we get to that point in the evening, what we'll do is we'll approach this a department at a time, and we'll lift that person up from the attendee into the panelist so that you can have a video of them. And then I would like everyone that has questions for that department to ask their questions at that point. When they're done, they'll drop off and come back in as an attendee, and we'll bring up the next department head for questions. Let's see. Then we'll have the state shared public hearing that's going to be handled by Neil Oberger, the city's budget officer. He'll also handle business from the audience in tandem with Chair Piscinari. And then we get to budget deliberations and approval. And at that point, I'm going to bring up a spreadsheet for tracking any changes that you'll want to make to the budget. And then at the end of that conversation, there's a number of motions put forward at the end of your packet, essentially for us to have a proposed budget move forward to the council at a later date for adoption, and as well as setting our levies and our state shared revenue. So I was listening to the audio of last year's budget committee, and while this slide itself is new, I think this slide has existed in one form or another for a number of years. And so in last year's budget committee, one of the things I said was that this was the last time that I would include this slide, and I was going to kill it after that. And here it is again. And in light of recent events, I think it's a relevant slide again. And instead of saying the last decade, I would be more inclined to say the last 2 decades. And what I want to do is go back to late 90s when Measure 5 and 50 were passed. And for those of you not familiar, Measure 5 and 50 is essentially what put that collar on residential property taxes. They could not increase by more than 3% a year. At the time, the critics said that this would basically cause government funding to just fall off of a cliff, and that government would change. It would no longer exist as it existed. And unfortunately, the critics got it wrong, because it wasn't ever a cliff that we were going to go off of. Rather, it was death by 1,000 cuts. And that's what we've been dealing with since. And what it has essentially done is pushed us towards a fee-for-service structure. We've seen more and more fees for services. And I think for the counselors, that's something you're very familiar with. I think that there's a lot of fatigue in our citizens around that area. And so we're running out of those types of services that we can link a reasonable fee to. And so this is really revisiting us where our expenditures are continuing to outpace our revenues. And I'm going to draw back on this, I think, throughout the evening. So this is the challenge we have. By the time it comes to budget committee, our budget typically looks like this. Our revenues are higher than our expenditures, and across the bottom, you see a consistent and healthy reserve. A healthy reserve to us in the general fund is defined as a reserve at around 20% or better. When it dips below that 20%, that's 20% of general fund operating expenditures, a single year of operating expenditures. When it dips below that 20%, you start getting into an unhealthy range. This is our 5-year forecast. This is the forecast that I brought in front of council in a work session back in October. And looking at this, there's some scary numbers in those outer years. You can see that the fiscal year 21 proposed, our reserve is above 20% at 21%. If you look at the change in net position, you can see that we're actually using $900,000 of our reserves. But I wasn't too troubled by that, as $500,000 of that is actually a interfund transfer over to a capital projects fund to save for future building, capital building needs. And then additionally, we also have body-worn cameras in this budget, and I think that's somewhere in the neighborhood of around $250,000 to $300,000 when we look at the full impact of that. So it makes sense that we could potentially use $900,000 in the reserves. Going into those outer years, how I think I described our feelings about this back in October is that as bad as this could look, I used the words cautiously optimistic. And the reason was this forecast didn't show a number of things. It didn't show in some outer years where we have some large industry that are coming off of enterprise zone exemptions. We know what the value of the assets were that went onto the books, but at the end of that 5-year period, it's challenging to estimate what the value of those assets will be when they are assessed taxes. So we knew that would be coming on. The other thing too is one of the big drivers in this structural imbalance is PERS, which was alluded to earlier by the city manager. I'm going to have a slide here in a moment. You know, I think we all recognize just a few months back, the stock market hit all-time highs of almost 30,000. And that return in the market, which impacts our PERS rates, was having a positive impact. And we were starting to see, we had very conservative PERS rates in there, and we were starting to kind of hear that some of those rates were sort of being revised downward in the outer year. So there were some positive signs at the time. This shows the PERS rate increases that we're expecting. Yes, Councilor Van Gordon.
Could you go back up a slide? I just had one quick question. When you look at the operating revenue forecast, and maybe this might be a question of what's actually in the budget, what's the revenue assumptions, growth assumptions you made going into this year's budget and then into the outer years here?
Okay, well, it's challenging to just give you a single kind of general revenue, because we really look at all the different revenues. We look at historic trends, and we try to be as accurate as we can. If we were to look at one of the larger revenues in here, I think for property taxes, we have a growth assumption of around 2.5%. We considered that to be conservative. In a good year, we're averaging around 3%. In an excellent year, we've sometimes seen a return around 4.5%.
Okay, so in the 2021 budget, when we think about it, when we think about the revenue, we should assume that you guys baked in a 2.5% growth rate for property tax revenues. What about revenue assumptions for either permitting or growth in fees? Are there revenue growth baked into this year's budget for those other funds as well?
There are. I couldn't speak to those percentages. Neil Obringer might be able to.
Yeah, so the permit revenue that comes to mind for me in the general fund is planning fee revenue. And that revenue source tends to be so variable year to year as it cycles with development, that we've, over the last few years historically, just held that relatively flat. And I believe that that is the revenue assumption that we have for planning fees this year as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And Councilor Van Gordon, I also want to say too, is we take a very conservative approach to our revenue projections. You know, we'd rather err on the lower side, not so much that we'd ever make cuts based on bad information, but just to leave us a little bit of room for unexpected situations. And that's another reason that I think that we were cautiously optimistic on this, is that they were very conservative revenue projections.
Hey, Nate.
Yes.
This is Councilor Sherry here. I think Councilor Van Gordon's raising an interesting issue, though, which is that I think you could argue the revenues are going to be lower this year than were projected. Have you got any numbers for this first quarter yet?
I do have numbers, and I guess if you want to go there, we can go there. It might be easier to kind of move through this and then open it up to questions.
Sure. I mean, if you've got them as part of your presentation, that's fine.
I do. They're not part of the presentation. This was completed prior to us putting these numbers together, but I've got them sitting here in front of me, and I'll definitely speak to them after that.
Thank you.
So this shows the PERS impact that we're experiencing, and you can see back in 14 through 17, it was relatively consistent, kind of slow growth, and then it just takes off. And we have our next increase happening in 22. Nancy mentioned that it's going to be a 20% increase in PERS over the prior year, and then another one in 24. And we also have to factor in what's happening in the market. That is going to have an impact here. Interest rates have just plummeted, and with the market dropping, I have a feeling in those outer years we might see some more significant than what's showing here increases. The nice thing is it'll take some time for it to find its way into these PERS rates, and it gives us time to respond. We mentioned earlier, and I'll talk about this a little later, is we've started to set aside some dollars that we have turned our PERS reserve, and that's something we can draw on at a later date to help offset this impact. This is the general fund FTE, and what I like about this slide is it shows what happened during last recession to maybe give you an idea of what could potentially happen in another recession. And I think that there's a kind of a general sort of consensus that the COVID-19 event has pushed us into a recession. The question at this point is how long and how deep. So from this slide, you can see that these sort of, in government, a lot of times recession's slow to hit us and it's slow to leave us. So even in FY14, when we were at our kind of lowest point in terms of FTE cuts we had made, we were already back into a growing economy. You can see that we slowly have added back FTE in FY21. We're not quite up to that full staffing level that we were back in FY10, but we are close. Unfortunately, just looking at pure FTE is not always a good way to look at this, because over this same 10-year period, the population of this community has grown. And so a better way to look at FTE is per capita. And in looking at our per capita, you can see that we bottomed out again in FY14 and just have really climbed up slightly. And what's a little bit unfortunate about this, and so what that means is, to a certain degree, staff still feel that same sort of stress in terms of workload as we felt at that lowest staff level back in FY14. But this is also our getting off point to the next recession. And really hard to say what this could look like here over the next few years, but something we'll watch closely. This is our general fund operating budget. And I like this pie chart because it shows the proportionate share of the different services that we provide, with public safety, which includes police, fire, emergency management, the city prosecutor, and the municipal courts, coming in around $30 million, or 74% of our general fund operating budget. And that's actually a little bit low, because separate from that is our administrative services department, CMO, HR, IT, finance, and city attorney's office, which, rather than existing within those departments, are outside, and a portion of that expense would also be allocated to public safety, as well as city facilities and vehicle maintenance. So we're probably looking at a public safety budget in the neighborhood of around $34 million. This shows our general fund revenues, and the largest revenue being our property taxes, but only at 57%. This also kind of gets at what I talked about earlier, is that we have been, because of Measure 5 and 50, moving away from taxes being our predominant funding source and starting to come up with sort of a basket of different revenues, and again, moving towards that fee-for-service structure. I think the one thing I want to point out here is our property taxes are coming at $23 million in the general fund. Our public safety cost was $34 million. And I think one of the hard things that a lot of us hear from the public, especially those who are in the departments where we have fees for services, is a common refrain from citizens is, why do I have these fees for services? Isn't this what I pay property taxes for? And unfortunately, we haven't done a good job of messaging this, but property taxes don't cover the cost of public safety, yet alone anything else. I'll kind of leave that at that. Moving on to the funds, and these next handful of slides, I'm including the funds that I consider sort of bellwethers or critical to the fiscal health of this organization. And I'll start to touch a little bit on the impact, potential impact of COVID-19, and talk about some of the numbers. The transit room tax fund. As you can see, we've enjoyed some strong revenues and have grown the reserves in this fund to a healthy level that could help us with some sort of tourist-related project in the future. With COVID-19, we have anecdotally heard that occupancy rates are somewhere in the neighborhood of around 10%. What's concerning here is that 5/9 of the revenue that we bring into this fund, we transfer over to the general fund in support of police and fire. So in looking at this fund, the actual impact just on the general fund alone, the dollars I'm talking about aren't, they're larger for the transit room tax fund, but for the portion that we would transfer over to the general fund, our best case scenario has a decrease in the last quarter of fiscal year 20 and all of fiscal year 21, a decrease of $580,000 to the general fund. Worst case, we're looking at potentially a $730,000 decrease in a transfer to the general fund. Now, TRT, when this event passes, is a fund that will come back and most likely quickly. So this one is more of a short-term shock. Going on to the Building Safety Fund, and this I refer to as our Feast and Famine Fund, as development has been kind of a feast and famine industry. You can look back at 14 again. That's sort of, I think, when we were at our lowest point from the impact of the 08 recession. We brought our reserves down almost to zero. And in fact, we were at a point where we had minimum staffing in this fund for the basic inspections and activities that we perform, where we could not cut FTE without cutting an actual service that we perform. So we had looked at potentially reducing all of staff with this fund down to 0.75 FTE. We never got to that point, luckily. Development picked back up. You can see some strong revenues in the coming years. They're up and down. They tend not to be kind of a single linear trend line. But what you do see is a very healthy reserve, almost at $3 million at the end of fiscal year 20. It is that reserve that will get us through the next recession. So this fund is in good shape. Street Operating Fund, you can see our revenues started to pick up in 2017. That was with the passage of HB 2017, which increased the gas tax and vehicle registration fees to local governments. And you can see our reserves starting to build. And this is why we came to council in the spring with that 7 FTE package to start focusing on maintaining better maintenance of our city infrastructure, and specifically for the street fund, a crack seal and slurry seal program. Now, COVID-19 will have an impact on this fund. The last couple months, folks aren't driving as much. We've heard from the state that the projected impact to the city of Springfield in fiscal year 21 is a decrease of about $300,000 in gas tax revenues. Local Sewer Operating Fund, and I'm going to just include the Drainage Fund, and we'll fly by it when that one comes up. These are two very healthy funds, and mainly because we can set user fees for full cost recovery. They have healthy revenues and healthy reserves. There was a question off of this one, and I think it was that the revenues were so much higher than the expenditures. And the reason is that red line is actually operating expenditure. The difference between the two is non-operating expenditures, which are significant for these two funds. Those would include capital contributions to capital project funds for future capital projects, and they would include debt service. The Ambulance Fund. This is a fund that we've talked a lot about with you. It's a fund that's been struggling. You can see the last few years that the expenditures have been exceeding the revenues, and we've been drawing down the reserves. For this fund, we've talked about a date in the future where we will have to have a transfer from the general fund to support this fund's continued operations. And there's some justification for doing that. But we didn't expect that to happen in fiscal year 21. Actually, while it shows hardly any reserve, our projections had fiscal year 21 still landing in the positive. In talking with Fire and Life Safety, their transports are down at this point by 42%. That's pretty significant, and we think they'll slowly come back, but it's going to take some time. And so we've had the task of trying to project the impact of COVID-19 on this fund kind of over the course of all of 21. And rather than just break it out into 20 and 21, we've decided to put the whole impact on 21 in the form of a decrease of about 15 to 20% in operating revenues in the ambulance fund. On a $4.5 million revenue, that can be significant. And what it ends up doing is it causes in 21 that reserve actually to be consumed up and a potential subsidy from the general fund. Best case, we're looking at a subsidy of around $335,000, worst case, $560,000. So that's going to put an increased stress on our general fund. The Booth Kelly property. Another fund that has been doing really well in recent years, fully leased, We've been building up the reserve. That's important because there's a lot of deferred maintenance on this property. Unfortunately, in fiscal year 20, we lost an anchor tenant, Greenbrier Rail, in a space that was uniquely suited to what they did. It's going to be a challenging space for us to lease out. Additionally, COVID-19 is going to have a significant impact on this fund. We have a number of businesses located over at Booth Kelly that their doors are closed right now, and we have a rent abatement program in place to help these businesses make it through this event and hopefully open their doors in the future. I don't have any numbers on this fund right now because I don't see a general fund impact, but this is something we will be working on here shortly. That being said, though, in fiscal year 20, one of the solutions to address the structural imbalance from that 5-year forecast was to have some new revenues, to create some new revenues. One of those was a $200,000 transfer from the Booth Kelly Fund to the general fund. We removed that from the fiscal year 21 budget. With the loss of that anchor tenant, that pretty much was the $200,000 transfer. That way we can maintain the reserves in this fund so as to address that backlog of deferred maintenance that needs to be addressed. Stormwater, I touched on that with the sewer fund. And then we're on to our medical dental reserve. This slide is another one I think that's been confusing for folks. I think there's a lot of questions. Our medical program is an expensive program, no question about it. However, one of the bright spots of this program is that we have been, over these past years, consistently beating both our peers, both in self-funded plans and traditional insurance in terms of the increases that they have experienced versus the increases we have experienced. You see that upward trend there in 20 and 21, but that's only because when we budget for this fund, medical is one of those things that is just, in any given year, you can have a good year and a bad year, and they can be drastically different. And so we have to always budget worst case scenario, knowing that it's going to be better than that. And that's what you're seeing in both the 20 estimated actual, not so much 20 estimated actual, but definitely in the 21 proposed. What's more is it looks like expenditures are going up and reserves are going down, that we're eating into our reserves. That's also not true. What is happening is we're doing these benefit holidays. We did 2 of them in fiscal year 19. We're going to do 2 of them in fiscal year 20. What that is we take a month and we don't charge our employees for their share of the health expense. And then we take the larger share that would be paid for by the city and transferred over to this reserve into this health insurance fund. But instead, we've been transferring into another reserve, which we've termed our PERS reserve, and that's where that PERS reserve is coming from. So we have been intentionally drawing down that reserve. The blue dotted line is what is considered to be a healthy reserve for this activity based on information we got from an actuarial study. So we're trying to draw down to that healthy level, and that's what's happening there. This is our total requirements, our budget. You can see for 21, we have a proposed operating budget of $117 million. It's all funds, and city-wide, a $350 million budget. That $350 million budget, I think for a lot of folks, a lot of times it's kind of like pops the eyeballs. It's like, wow, that's a big budget. But when you look at that non-departmental piece of it, that's $185 million. I'm going to get to that in a minute, but that is a budgeted expenditure that most of that will not get expended. Before I move on, though, you can see the breakout of our personal services by categories, salaries, medical, dental, PERS, whatnot. All right, this takes that same total requirement, puts it into a pie chart where you can see the proportionality of it. Non-departmental being the largest at 53%. This is taking that non-departmental and breaking it out. So that $185 million, $153 million is reserves. That means it's a expenditure that is locked up and cannot be spent. That also includes the contingency and the unappropriated balance. Additionally, those interfund transfers, majority of those are transfers to other capital project funds, saving for future capital project needs. So while it shows us an expenditure, it's actually going somewhere else and being treated as a revenue, and then most likely being held as part of those reserves that you see, the 153 million. The only thing that I think that truly represents expenditures from the non-departmental is our debt service at 13 million or 7%. This is the operating cost, that 117 million operating costs by department. When we looked at the general fund, public safety was the largest, but when we look at all funds, development and public works becomes the largest. That being said, development and public works contains the budget for MWMC, so that skews that number a bit. And when we say it contains the budget for MWMC, another separate organization, it's not just the city's employees and capital projects. It is all of MWMC. So the plant and all the Eugene employees also pass through our budget. So for that number there, 46 million, 22 million roughly of that is MWMC. This is our total budget for capital. Again, a good portion of that is the MWMC regional wastewater, 21 million or 45%. And we're on to our FY21 highlights. Essentially, this is what changed from the prior year budget. And I think when we talked about putting this budget forward in front of you, it was referred to as a status quo budget, but that was status quo in the context that we just already completed it, and then we have the impact of COVID-19, and we know that could change it, so let's just put it forward as it was and come back and revisit it later. I do want to point out, though, that this was in no circumstance a status quo budget to begin with. We had some significant adds here that were really advancing the interests of the cities. The first one being the infrastructure system needs, the 7 FTE at an ongoing cost of $775,000. Another one was the body-worn cameras at a increase of $192,000, and that's not the full cost because there's also some cost related to that in the finance budget that I don't think is singled out here looking at this. But recognizing that there are some expenditures here that you may want to revisit, this is a slide that I can bring up later in the question section for me, or I can even bring it up later in the deliberations. FY21 and beyond, our challenges. Interesting is we've got the same challenges that we've been dealing with, though last year we had another line item towards the bottom that said next recession with a question mark. That is gone, and now we have COVID-19, and I think we can safely assume that we are headed into a recession as a result. Again, the question becomes how long and how deep. And our solutions, the same solutions, these are ongoing solutions, meaning that we'll be working on these year after year after year. The first two, grow our economic base and encourage population growth. These are two items, we work on these, but it's difficult to move the needle on them. And so where we tend to really go is increasing the revenue base. I mentioned how we kind of moved to that fee for service structure, but we're also starting to really exhaust that option. I think we're seeing a lot of fatigue out there in our community on user fees. So what that really leaves us is service level changes and efficiencies and cost containment of current services. That is probably the area that we will be looking to rebalance the budget in the future once we have kind of better projections to work with. With that, that's it for my presentation. Any questions for me?
George, go ahead.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. The first one, what is the city retirement plan, that line item? How does it differ from PERS?
Okay, the city retirement plan, we didn't go into PERS, I think, until, I want to say 2002 or 2003. So before that, we had our own city retirement plan. There was a group that decided to stay in their retirement plan. It is a closed plan. It's mostly made of public safety personnel and predominantly police personnel. I think right now it's got about 20 members, and it's just another pension plan that we have to fund and watch.
Okay. The other is more of a comment about the page labeled fiscal year 21 and beyond, the encouraged population growth. I think that has some, if you encourage population growth for a short term, it can probably make some increase in certain revenue areas, but it drags along an increase in cost as the demand for services goes up for that population. They're going to need more infrastructure. They're going to need more social services. They're going to need more police, fire protection. So I think it's kind of one of those things that it might be a short-term gain, but a long-term liability.
Yeah, without like going off into a theoretical conversation where I could probably bring Tom Boy up and we could speak for hours. You're right in a lot of ways, but also too, depending on how that growth looks, because when that growth is in the form of density, that sometimes can create some economies of scale. So yes, demands definitely do increase, but it can be done, I think, smartly to kind of help with future budget needs.
Okay.
This is Sherry. I have a question.
George, do you have any more questions? Okay. Sherry,
No,
go ahead.
this time.
Okay, thanks, George. Sherry, go ahead.
Sure. On back to page 24 of 27, and some of the additions. I had a couple questions about those. One of them has to do with the Olympic trials, the 200,000 from the transit room tax. Since they've changed the date of the Olympic trials, is that something that are we still expected to pay the 200,000 for this coming year, or are we waiting for another year?
Well, again, when we put this budget together, that Olympic trial was still happening.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's not happening in the same time frame. But we didn't change anything. So really, that's up to you to decide.
Okay, so we could in fact put it off for another year, or put it into a reserve even if it looks like we have enough money. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, then I had another question about the Chamber of Commerce, the 25,000. Is that for the person that we're paying for? Well, tell me what that's for.
Yes, that is for an FTE over, I think at least half of it. I think the Chamber of Commerce is covering the other half. We made a 3-year commitment. This would be the second year of that 3-year commitment, and it was for an individual who was going to work on moving the track project along.
Okay, so is that still in the works?
As we speak, everything is in the works unless you tell us otherwise.
Okay, so how much are we in, how much do we have to keep that contract with the chamber? Is there something, could we delay it? Could we, I'm not seeing that there's, well, can we delay it, the 25,000? We've paid 1 year, correct?
That is correct. Honestly, I'm not familiar with the language in the contract. I don't know if it's it's a kind of ironclad 3-year contract and we've got to pay it, or if there is that room for negotiation. So that's something that can be looked into by staff.
Okay, well, I would be interested in knowing about that. And then I see that there's some of these costs come out of forfeiture funds. Does that totally cover the body-worn cameras, at least the cost of them, not the you're saying ongoing. So is the forfeiture funds going to pay for the body-worn cameras and all of the tech that is involved with those?
No, so you're right, that does say forfeiture funds. Where that's budgeted actually is in Fund 204, which is a special revenue fund. We're in the process of applying for a grant, which could cover a portion of that. We could use forfeiture funds partly. With that particular one, I don't remember that being part of the mix for that. But the bigger issue will be the ongoing cost. The ongoing cost, forfeiture funds are limited. Body-worn cameras is going to be a general fund expenditure.
But it's not going to begin until when?
Well, the last direction we were given was by you, not you in particular, but council. Yes. And until you tell us otherwise, we are following the direction we were previously given.
Okay, so it would be
moving forward.
So it would be budgeted for fiscal year 21, the ongoing cost. Okay.
I think we were looking at implementations timeframe somewhere in the neighborhood. I heard October and I saw Jessica gasp, and I think we're kind of looking more realistically at January.
Okay, so then the last question has to do with the city facilities ADA upgrades. Can you explain to me what that is?
Well, yes. So the city has an ADA transition plan, and so we are starting to set dollars aside for us to start addressing some of the upgrades that we need to make on this. And fiscal year 20 was the first year we budgeted it. We haven't made that transfer in fiscal year 20. That's something that could even be up for debate. And then again in this budget as well. But in looking at that, you know, you're always exposed to the possibility that someone files a claim that something isn't ADA compliant. And I think there's a general recognition that it would be challenging for any organization to get right up to that perfect level of ADA compliant. So if you show yourself taking a reasonable action, I think that would help in that type of situation as opposed to where you're doing nothing. And so that transfer was for us to start really taking it serious and start to make some of these upgrades to our facilities.
So is that a reserve fund then?
Yes, it is. That is actually not an expenditure at this time. It's going over to Fund 420. If we keep this in the fiscal year 21 budget and do the 20 transfers, and that's for the capital replacement reserve as well, we'll have $800,000 set aside for capital replacement and $200,000 set aside for ADA upgrades.
Okay. All right. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Welcome.
Councillor Van Gordon. Councillor Van Gordon, go ahead. You're on mute.
Apparently, I got muted by one of the organizers, so.
Sorry.
I don't blame you. Okay, so just a couple quick, well, I guess a statement about the Olympic trials. Like they've gotten moved. Our commitment still is there for them. My preference would actually be to try to get the money off the books right now, so that we can kind of see where we're actually going to be at. Because I don't see a way we're going to want to not do the race walk in Springfield, right? Especially when we're coming out of that economic activity. And I think to follow up on one thing that Sherry said, honestly, Nate, I wouldn't be supportive of you doing research on what that Chamber of Commerce contract actually says. We made a 3-year commitment to the Chamber of Commerce, and we need to keep our word to them. They lined up funding on their side to fund an FTE, and I think it would be a little bit on the disingenuous side to sort of come back and, you know, I don't even know what we would be doing, but it's a good project, right? The money's there. We've already committed to them to do it. We need to be good partners to the chamber for this. The other question that I had, I guess, broadly about the budget, and this is a concern that I've got. When we pass it and then we adopt it at council, we essentially authorized you to spend the money, right? So and maybe this is a question more for Nancy, but help me understand how we're going to control costs so that we don't overspend while we're figuring out how much money we're actually going to have.
Yes, so we're actually already working on it, and our plan is to have some potential adjustments that we can make as early as mid-June. You know, whether we come to you in a work session then, or we come to you later in the fall, or early fall, hopefully, when you come back off your recess. But we are going to take action sooner. I hear what you're saying. We're taking this serious, and we've already started an exercise to start identifying potential cuts.
So the plan really would be if everything works out perfectly, when the budget this budget goes into effect, we would have actually already talked about having a roadmap at council, so you guys kind of knew where to start going while you prepared the supplemental budget. Absolutely, that's what we would like to have. Okay. So can we go back up and just with the fire and life safety breathing apparatus? Remind me again what that one was.
That's the self-contained breathing apparatus. that was actually saved for through the Equipment Reserves Fund 713, and we had a planned replacement happening in fiscal year 22. We moved it up 1 year because the equipment is actually failing. So these would be the tanks that you would be wearing on your back if you were going into a smoke-filled environment and needed to breathe.
But the current equipment we have is failing a little bit quicker than what we would have thought its lifespan was.
Yes, and if at a later point we bring up Chief Heppel, it might be a good time for him to explain what's going on with that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, do you have any more questions, Sean?
I'm good, thank you.
All right, I have a quick one, Nathan.
Okay.
So when I remember, you mentioned about the Chamber of Commerce position, and that you're not really familiar with the agreement, et cetera. But if I remember, that position is for economic development. It's not dedicated to a track project. Is that not correct?
Well, you know, my understanding was maybe a little bit different. There's two amounts of money that we're sending to them.
Right.
One of them is for economic development, I think, and the other is for the track project. But I think someone who could probably speak to that a little better would be Neil Ladati, if he's available. Just give it a moment.
Yes. Yeah, I'm here. So yeah, Councilor Pictionary, you are correct. That is an economic development specialist position. It covers a wide range of opportunities throughout the Chamber of Commerce, so not specific to any one project.
Right, that was my understanding. So it was kind of some misinformation that might have come across, and someone may want to try to grab onto it, and I just want to make sure that we're set straight.
Yeah, thank you. I apologize.
That's all right. Okay, so if we don't have any actual questions regarding Mr. Bell's presentation and the budget, general budget, we could move into the public hearing, state shared revenue.
No, actually not yet.
Not
my agenda, but you have the deliberation to ask department heads questions. That would be, I believe, item D, question and discussion on the budget.
Oh, well, okay. I thought we were already discussing the budget. So,
well, questions for my presentation, but if you have questions for the executive team, that would be the opportunity to ask about their particular budget.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I have some, as opposed to what was already covered. I have some in particular to the departments myself, and some others may also. So I will. I'll hold off and let others ask questions of the specific departments. Is there anyone wishing to ask the department heads regarding their specific department budgets?
Can I make one recommendation? Councilor Pictionary, we might go department by department.
Okay.
So do this in a methodical way.
That's
so,
fine.
Why don't we start with HR?
Any questions from the panel in regards to the Human Resources Department? Okay, next one, Nate.
Let's go with finance.
Other than I want to comment, thank you very much for putting this heavy lift together.
Thank you.
Mr. Lundberg has got a question for the finance department. Go ahead, Luke.
Yes. Actually, this is, I had sent it in earlier, so this is kind of just a follow-up for that. This was the question in regards to, hold it up here off to the side, sorry. It was about the text messaging system that was implemented for court reminders, and it was mentioned that that improved the rate of collections. And I was wondering, is there some sort of cost breakdown that we could get for that? Because that's one of the things that I'm really excited about from the finance department, that type of move where it's implementing technology to help create a little bit more efficiency in the system and get those costs recovered where we can.
Yeah, Luke, I got that at a point where I was recorded.
I know, I was quite late, so don't worry about that.
And that's a number that's easy for us to get. I just don't have it. Yes. But you also asked a second part to that I can't answer, and that was the cost of that functionality. And actually, we've got a relationship with Tyler Technology, who provides our court software, to where we are a beta tester for them. So they roll these functionalities out to us at no cost and allow us to work out the kinks. From my understanding, we have yet to see a cost for that particular functionality, and I don't know if we will, or if it's just been part of our regular subscription.
That's outstanding. I appreciate you guys doing that. The other question I had when I had sent in was about, you mentioned the rising cost of mental health treatment within the court system. And I was wondering how much of a mitigation ability does Cahoots give to that? Is that something that you track, that you're aware of? Because I think Cahoots is one of the programs that not only has a lot of public support, it's just such a great program. It's amazing, but that cost is so high. It's so significant. Is it something that you've looked at and done a cost analysis for? Is it reducing costs in the courts? Is that something that you can basically utilize as a selling point in any other area, I guess?
Yeah, so another great question, actually, and what's interesting is we were actually discussing this the other day in the budget team. Cahoots, the budget for Cahoots sits in the police budget, but the impact of Cahoots is it takes pressure off fire and life safety, it takes pressure off the police, off the jail, and off the municipal court system. Additionally, it keeps these individuals also out of the emergency room, so it takes pressure off of our hospitals. It's something that's challenging to quantify. It's something that we want to quantify. I imagine we'll be working on that in some time in the future. But it's hard when you have, what we'll do is look at historical trends. Okay. Just see if we see a flattening or a change in those trends and then try to put a value to that. But it's always hard to put a value to something that you've kept someone out of a system, but by keeping them out of the system, you have no way of knowing who you kept out of the system.
Exactly. Okay, that was it for me. Mine were more just comments, so I appreciate those two steps that you are taking. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Luke. Is there any other questions? George, go ahead.
Thank you. Question I have, I really think it's a finance question, even though it relates to the question number 3 I had submitted and there was a response to. It was for some of the enterprise funds, the 2 sewer funds and road fund, and what the indirect charges, how they've gone up much higher than the rate of inflation. And one of the justifications for that was that there was an FTE charge increase of about $500 per FTE and an increase in the number of FTE for within public works in those funds, I believe. But if you run the math on that, that's about $500 per FTE. Unless I'm missing something here, it works out to about $3,500 increase, and you're looking at a $153,000 increase on indirect rates.
Yeah, unfortunately, that $500 was the increase in the indirect rate over the previous year. That is not the reason for this happening. This is happening because each FTE, and I want to say the indirect cost per FTE is around $18,000. So that 7 FTE would be multiplied by $18,000. Now, let me go back on this. We had already, when that was approved by council, we had already essentially put our budget together. We figured out what our indirect, and our indirect essentially is made up of finance, HR, IT, CMO, and CAO, the city attorney's office. We figured out the cost of that, and we divided it by our FTE. And now we had recovered those dollars. When we added those new FTE, we didn't go back and change the formula because we would have brought everybody else's down and brought that up, if that makes sense. So even though they would have had, okay, so what ends up happening is we end up over collecting a little bit in this first year, probably by about that much in terms of cost recovery on our centralized services. But then next year's budget, when we go to recalculate our indirect, it will be recalibrated where it'll kind of reshuffle or redivide that number, and they'll have their share. So we wanted to get it in the budget because we wanted that full budget impact of that in all the years to be showing, but there is a little bit of an overcollection in that first year. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck, or George. Any other questions for Nate? Kate, I guess my questions that I have is probably best deferred to the department heads, because I think you're supposed to be just giving us the numbers and then they can give us the explanations. Is that correct?
Well, it depends. I'm also a department head as well as giving you the bigger numbers.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Yes, if you have number of questions related to a specific department, we'll bring up those department heads.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions at this point? Okay, thank you. I do. First, and this is going to sound terrible, but it's not meant to be, but under the SCBA charges of the 650,000, and you mentioned that some of them are failing, I guess that would be to the department head. Can they explain as far as, is that replacement of the ones that are failing, or is that a replacement of all the SCBAs, or is there testing that shows that there is life left in some of the SCBAs that don't have to be replaced this year, but can be replaced next year as currently planned for? So is this so you see what I'm saying, is this a total replacement, or is it testing can show that the other ones are safe to use for another year and we're not replacing them too soon?
So Neil, are you bringing up Chief Heppel?
Yep, I'm making him a panelist right now.
Okay, we'll have him up here. And then everyone else, please think of your questions for Chief Heppel.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. So yeah, let me address that. That's great. We've had problems with the MSA SCBA for a number of years now, in that we identified about 3 years ago failing mechanisms within that particular device. We've been working with MSA over the years to try and find a solution to the challenges. I don't remember the exact number, but I'd say our logistics folks have actually made 3 to 5 recommendations to repair the device, in which MSA has actually incorporated into it, and we still continue to have challenges and issues with it. So it's not that it's a particular device that's failing, it's the series or the system that continues to fail. And what we've had demonstrated is freeze-ups in the device. We've been able to demonstrate how it is reproducible. And our staff has actually produced a couple 100-page document down to the part number of the challenges that we've had with this associated system. We've also seen other fire departments transition out of the system for similar issues. And so it's not down to a particular device. With that, we have to look at our entire system from a safety perspective, and that is we can't predict which particular device is going to fail, obviously, so it is a system-wide transition or swap out. The other piece is that I get asked questions, well, can we just do them on like 50% of the fleet this year and do 50% of the fleet next year? Well, the challenge that's associated with that is a safety concern. So this is one of our absolute life safety devices, to include our bunker gear as well as some other equipment, such as our radios. And to have a different device, and now we go into an environment which is imminent life or death, where I can't see, I can't do things, right. and there's a training component associated with that as well. So this is a complete transition. We're just 1 year ahead of schedule, and we moved it 1 year ahead of schedule because of the clear documented challenges that we're having with this device. And we're doing this in conjunction with the City of Eugene side as well. So we have a complete system swap out simultaneously, and that's our goal.
Okay, that's a very good answer. And I, in my head, I was thinking of tank failure or something. I didn't even think about the pressure demand switches and whatnot. So thank you. Yeah. Great explanation. Thank you. Anyone else, while we have the chief on the camera, for fire and life safety. Sean, go ahead.
Hey, Chief. Thank you. I had a question about the ground transport fee, the GEMT. So that money we still haven't gotten reimbursed for. We're still working through what it's actually. It could show up any day.
So, GEMT, which stands for Ground Emergency Medical Transport, is function that came up in 2016, and this year we were actually able to apply for fiscal year 18 and 19 reimbursement. We have received our fiscal 18 reimbursement, and we expect to receive our fiscal 19 reimbursement here, if it hasn't already arrived here before the end of this fiscal year. And so with that, based on the current process, we will apply for our FY20 fiscal year, which ends at the end of June. We will apply for that funding reimbursement at the end of July, and we would expect to receive that sometime in November. So 3 years, 18, 19, and 20. We've received 18, standing by for 19. We'll apply for 20 at July and hope to get that in November.
So based on just what was in the presentation, that we would expect, if we get the routine right, to essentially net $340K a year for the ambulance fund?
Approximately 320 to 340. Yes, sir, that's correct.
And then the projections too, Councilor Van Gordon.
Okay. Okay. And then another question about the ambulance fund. We know that calls are dropping, right? Because everybody's essentially in stay in place, which is good, right? Like staying home is healthy. So are we dropping Medicaid and Medicare calls? Or are we dropping, is it going across the board, or is it hitting mainly the commercial insurance? And the reason why I'm asking is you carry such a high percentage of government healthcare that essentially you're losing, like it costs us money to provide that service. So is the mix changing at all, or is it, just roughly across the board?
So we started seeing our decrease in ambulance transports around the middle of March, and we're seeing, I think Nate said, about a 42% decrease since then. It's across the board. It's not that a particular payer mix. To answer your question, about 80% of our payer mix is Medicare and Medicaid, and only about 10%-ish, maybe 11%-ish is commercial, and the rest is self-pay. And so, no, we're seeing that across the spectrum. It's not that there's any particular group that is diminishing the amount of transports.
Okay. Okay. And then when you look out over, ambulance funds are always something that we're concerned about, right? Like, is there something that's sort of in flight, something that you could talk a little bit more to bring some balance back to it? Or would you see it, the trajectory that we're on, really going towards that general fund subsidy annually?
Yeah, so one thing we have received is Health and Human Services as part of the CARES Act, and I apologize, I'm going to get too deep here. There have been some recommended or proposed revenue streams. So for the city of Springfield, we received $69,000 from Health and Human Services at the federal level to help stipend some of those costs. However, I can tell you, when you just look at simple reimbursement loss, since the middle of March, it doesn't cover that by any stretch of the imagination. We're going to go into a second round of that. How much we will be eligible for will be dependent upon our eligibility, our Medicare, Medicaid transport rates, et cetera. But we'll certainly go after that funding to try and shore up the ambulance transport fund going forward. But at this point, that's the revenue streams that we have available to us, other than our normal revenue for transport from our normal payer mix.
All right, thanks, Chief.
Thank you, Sean. Is there any other questions for the fire chief? And I just have one more that I thought of while Sean was asking you questions. Chief, when we went to the private, and I think Sean hit on it, maybe I didn't catch it, but when we went to the privatized fire med program, as far as admin privatized, and can you give a brief update? Is it too soon to know how that is penciling out, if it's actually lessening the cost for that program for us?
Sure. So this last year, we had one of our long-term employees elect to retire, and so we took advantage of that opportunity to take a look at maybe contracting out our fireman services. We did an RFP process. And one of the vendors and one of our partners who we've worked with for years was LifeFlight, was the successful applicant of that program. So we transitioned our administrative functionality, which includes managing of the program, as well as our advertising, collecting the fees, et cetera, to FireMed. That took effect, I believe we started the transition in March, and they took over the whole program on April 1st. Between now and the end of June, first part of March, is our normal, what's traditionally been our normal FireMed campaign program. So we really won't see the outcome or impact of that until we get well into first, second quarter of next fiscal year.
Good, thank you for that update. And if we can, and I know at least for me, if we can kind of get an update when that happens, after you get a good picture of that, I'd love to have an update, see how that's going to roll out.
Absolutely, happy to do it.
Thank you. Any other questions for the chief? All right, I think that's good. Chief Heppel, thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, is there any additional questions in regards to the budget that Nate Bell had lined out? For any other departments, I should say.
I have a question.
Yes, who's I?
Sherry.
Oh, okay, Sherry, go ahead.
Okay, so I just I was looking at some of the costs that we have budgeted for gas and oil, and since those prices have dropped dramatically, and I think we asked about filling our tanks if we've done that, our reserves, and is there a chance that we might be able to save a little money? And also the fact that we aren't making as many transports, is there a possibility of having a little savings in the cost of gas and oil?
Nate, are you there?
I am.
Or whoever does fleet, maybe that's from Public Works.
Yeah, I think there's no question that we'll see some savings from the lower prices. Unfortunately, we had a failure of one of our tanks, and we're still in the process of having it replaced, which means that's a tank that we can fill up. That's a diesel tank. But I think that you can probably assume that as we do draw down tanks, we are filling them up with that cheaper gas.
Excellent.
Thank you. I just, my car is still full of gas that I paid very expensive gas, and I can't seem to run it out.
Who's muted? All right. Is there more questions, Sherry?
No, I think that's fine. I did have a question about the process here. Are we planning on going through to the point of actually adopting this budget tonight?
It depends upon how far we get with the questions. I assume it's already it's 7:54.
Right.
So I'm not sure how that will lay out. I know I've got some more questions and some recommendations on the budget.
Right. Well,
yeah.
So I was just hoping that we could, I have another meeting at 8:30, and I was just wondering if we could look at some kind of a closing time and maybe carry this over to the next meeting. I just don't see that we're going to be able to do all the deliberations. It's really difficult to move back and forth on, the way we're working here. That's just my my opinion. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Sean, go ahead.
Hey, Nate, just to follow up on the question Sherry asked, I really think that I would pursuing maybe an actual futures contract might make sense where we don't have to store the oil. Maybe it's a future delivery. That's something we probably need to explore, because if we can sign a contract to get gas for the next year, that could be a pretty big savings.
Absolutely. I think for ourselves and looking at that, it kind of gets into that realm of speculation. And so I think we tend to try to avoid that. But if that is something you want us to pursue, we definitely can.
I would be interested in seeing more information about it. I don't know what's available and how they work, right? I'm not an expert on fuel features by any means, but you know, it might be worth asking a few more questions. So.
Okay, I made note.
Okay, let's see. Here we go. Is there questions from any other panelists in regards to any specific departmental questions? All right, I have a couple for on my own here. I need to ask. I guess this is. I'll have some for the police department, and I have some for development services, whichever.
Let's bring police up next.
Okay, and Luke, you have a question real quick. Go ahead.
Yeah, for DPW and police. So
let's go with police first.
I'll bring up Chief Lewis here in just a second.
Can I ask which attachment we're looking at for these different departments? So I realize that. Can you do that? Is that possible?
Yeah, I think, you know, it would be from you reviewing your materials, and then if you want to speak to a specific page, address that page. Just mention that.
So, but if I'm looking for right now, fire and life safety was attachment 16. So what attachment is the police? Was my question.
Okay.
Attachment 25.
Thank you.
Have you got a hold of the chief yet, Nate?
Chief Lewis should be available now.
Oh, there you go. Welcome, Chief.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So I think Luke Lundberg has got some questions for you, and then I know I do, and I'm sure that's going to trigger some others.
Yep.
Okay. Evening, Chief. Okay, so the questions I had I had addressed them earlier today, so I'm not sure if any of the other members of the committee were able to see them, but I just want to make sure that I'm clear on what I was told. This is specifically about the $100,000 request for funding from the asset forfeiture fund for the handguns, sites, and FLIR specifically. Okay, so I just want to make sure that I'm clear that the way that this fund works is it's essentially a special fund that is to pay for things that the city would not typically pay for or would not be funded previously.
Correct. So federal forfeiture funds are from asset forfeiture that we seize from drug dealers. These funds, I don't want to get too down in the weeds, but the funds are either federal, state has a couple different ones. And so these funds all have similar rules of what you can use them for. They have to be for law enforcement purposes, obviously. That's kind of the main one. And then beyond that, there are some limitations of what you can use those particular monies for. But basically, you hit it on the head. It has to be an increase to the budget, something that you either didn't budget for or something new to the budget. It can't supplant current budget. And in this particular case with the handguns, we have not put those in a sinking fund, a 713 fund. So those come up every about 10 years, and that's why we're asking to use the forfeiture funds for that.
Yeah, the handguns element of that is that's a more understandable purchase right now. That's a absolute that it's on every officer essentially at all times while working. So that element of it. But my question is more the sites, the FLIRs are labeled here in the message that I was sent that they are sites were something new. that we're not, these are new purchases as opposed to maintenance or something else. Is that something that is worthwhile considering saving that funding? And if there's something that comes up at the end of this year when revenues drop from the whole situation of COVID, is it worthwhile that those funds would still be there theoretically, or would they even be there? Do they have rollover? And is that something that cites maybe something new, is not necessarily in an ideal world? Yes, we pay for it today. We're not in an ideal world right now. So is it something that we can pass over?
So to answer your question regarding the sites, they are new. The idea behind these particular sites is that they can improve the hit ratio for our officers as much as anywhere from 20 to 25%, which is very significant when you have an officer involved shooting. And so this is something we've been identifying since this is new technology that's coming out over the last couple of years. We've been taking a really hard look at this. And so, you know, if you look at it from a liability perspective, it's pretty small dollars if you're spending $30,000 for some sites to add those on. The FLIR, which is a forward-looking infrared device, that's, you know, we're just trying to replace an old one. Can it work 2 or 3 more years? Yes, I'm not going to tell you it can't. That wouldn't be true. It's just we've had this one for a number of years. It's just not nearly as good as the current generations, and so that's why we've asked to spend the federal forfeiture fund or the forfeiture funds for that. We do have, just to give you a little bit of idea, you know, we do have some additional money coming into the forfeiture funds. We've had some successful operations in the last probably 2 months. And while it does take some time for that money to filter back into and go through the process, I feel pretty confident that I can sit here and tell you that we have roughly about $100,000 or more that we've seized within the last few months that will go into that fund eventually. Maybe not for 6 months, could be take a year. But so I feel pretty confident that whatever money we've asked to spend here, we've almost already replaced.
Okay, so let me just make sure that I'm understanding this properly. Is that even if we were to say pass off some of those costs, it wouldn't necessarily benefit any situation in the future to have these funds today saved until then? It wouldn't necessarily help you or help cover a potential loss in any way.
Well, again, it can't be used to supplant a budget item. So if the city made a cut on a particular part of our budget, let's just pretend it's $30,000 someplace, we can't take $30,000 from the forfeiture fund and cover that cost. Now, the area it can help us in is in overtime. We can have overtime costs covered by forfeiture funds for certain operations. And so in that respect, it could help us out down the road.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Does anybody else on the panel have questions for the chief?
This is Sherry.
Hi, Sherry, go ahead.
This has to do with the 219% increase for contractual services. I just like an explanation. It is line number 611008 under personnel services. Well, no, it's under materials and services.
Page
it's on
one
page
of
1 of 5.
No, at the bottom right-hand corner, what page is it?
It says page 1 of 5, and it's just says contractual services. It used to be $48,000 and $40,000 range, and it's now $143,000 that you're budgeted for.
So I've got my super handler with help me out. I think that's where we chose to put the. I'm sorry, I covered somebody. I think that's where we chose to put the body worn cameras. Part of that's in there, and that's why that's just that huge increase from prior year. And Nate, maybe you can confirm that with us.
It's 97,000 of it. It's body worn camera for sure.
Yeah, I can't off the top of my head, but Neil Obringer might be able to.
It's 97,000 increases
This is,
for the body worn
Neil,
cameras.
I'm taking a
So
look at it.
97,000. I know that 97,000 of that's for the body cameras. I know that much. We can get you an explanation exactly what that is. Oh, I'm sorry. The rest of it is the Green Hill contract on there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. It's, anyone else have any questions for Chief Lewis? Okay, and I do have, if I can, bend your ear a little bit or ask you well, I guess that would be under, I just have some recommendations on some expenditures. And I'll just throw this across the room at you, Chief, is that I'm looking at the body worn cameras, and I know that you were given a directive by the council to have a date certain before the end of year in implementation. And of course, that directive was given at a time where we were pretty certain of our future, and then we got reminded that none of us are certain about our future. And so I'm looking at that, and if we were to completely take that off the burner for this year and to look at it into next budget year, seems to me that would be an instant savings of $200,000 or more, plus ongoing costs of another FTE, et cetera, which can't be paid for by the forfeiture funds. So what kind of savings would the department and / the city realize if we put this project and pushed it forward, so that way we know where we're sitting much more clearly, and it wouldn't harm us as much this year because of our uncertainty this year? What kind of a savings do you think that would be to the budget?
Well, I mean, just this year, as you see, it's about half a year's worth of body cameras. So it's about $150,000 that's in the police budget. And then I think there's some more of that in the finance budget. So you'd realize that initially. Then, you know, as you know, and you mentioned, the ongoing costs of this system for a full year is about $280,000 for, you know, years 2, 3, 4, and 5 out down the road. So there's some real significant costs. I recognize that this was a priority for the council, but I also recognize that we are in unprecedented times, and I hate to use that word, everybody keeps using it, but we are. This is an addition that, you know, to the budget that we haven't had in the past. And there is, once we start that program, again, it's going to be almost impossible to turn it off as if we face further cuts or further problems down the road here in the next few years. And so I'm okay. In fact, if we want to delay this or take another look at it next year, and I totally understand why we would do that.
Okay.
Joe?
Yes, Marilee, go ahead.
I just one comment on that. I have heard from community members their fear that that's going to be taken off the table in the budget meetings and stuff. They have a big concern that they're going to lose the body cameras. So it's something to consider, that there's people out there that are concerned that that's not going to take place. And so it's just, it needs to be part of the conversation if that is something that we're going to deliberate over.
Yes, I think for me, I think that's going to be brought up for sure. I'm just looking at it from the perspective of that because of this current situation that I'm looking at. I personally want to look to see at whatever expenses are in the budget. If it's not a gotta do it this year thing, I would just as soon wait and reserve all that money, whatever we can push into that reserve, and see how things flesh out. And if we can or need to do some budget adjustments mid-year or 1 year from now or whatever, then we have that option. But I certainly, I totally don't want to get rid of that camera program at all. I definitely don't.
I understand that, and I just was throwing out what comments that have come to me in regards to the budget. But I totally understand that. If we decide to do that, we need to make sure that we have good information go out to the public.
I would agree. Any other comments, Chief?
Can I add a couple comments? Can I add a couple comments about the body camera just to make you aware? And so even if we were going forward with this program, I know I was very ambitious of saying we get this going by October, and then Wiser Head says probably realistically January. That may be delayed a little bit further because in talking with IT, they have some real, because of their responsibilities for the COVID crisis, they have some projects that may be delayed a little bit further. And so I just want to make sure the council is aware of that the project may not, even if we went forward, may not happen exactly in January anyway. And then the other part of that is we did apply for the grant. We got direction to do that, and Jessica Crawford did an excellent job of putting that together and was just recently submitted that. And we expect to hear back on that grant. Now, again, the grant pays for just that initial implementation. It doesn't cover any ongoing costs. And we should probably hear about the grant sometime in June.
Thank you.
That's good. Yes, that's good additional information, Chief. I think that's the only thing I have for the Chief. Anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you, Chief Lewis. I appreciate your participation and answering our questions.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.
Okay, anyone else on the panel have any questions for any of the department heads that have not been available to us at this point? Let's see, hang on, let's see. George, you have a question for another department? Yes. Okay,
yes,
go ahead.
For Public Works when they're available.
Okay.
So if it's all right, would it make sense to bring up Brian Conlon, Matt Stouter, and Tom Boyott together to address all DPW questions?
Yes. If you folks don't mind, I'd like to bring up a little bit of a process question going back to Sherry's recommendations or talking. We do have some public that would like to speak. It's 12 minutes after 8. And I'm kind of fearful that if we dive into another department, it's going to definitely take us into the 8:30 time. So I'd like to hear some input from the panelists to see if we want to maybe, and if we can, Nate, if we are able to break away and have the public say their comments so all the panelists can hear for just a short bit, and then we can come back.
No, yeah. They'll do it Tuesday. You're already scheduled, Mike. You're already scheduled for next Tuesday.
That's Brian speaking. So, Joe, Council Petitioner, that's good question, because another thing, we have 3 people who've shown up physically that are sitting over in the library meeting room. So okay. It would be nice to have them do their business from the audience. The other thing is we had to specifically notice for tonight for the public hearing on state shared revenue. It would also be nice for us to knock that one out this evening.
Right. I think we should.
We were scheduled to be here till 9:30.
Oh, were we? Okay,
yep.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that 9:30.
Yeah, the meeting was scheduled to 9:30.
Where was that?
I didn't see that.
I didn't see that either.
Yeah, I didn't. I guess it's
might have been in the invite, but honestly, it goes as late as you want it to go. If you want to go earlier, you go earlier. If you want to go later, you go later.
I'd like to say that I'm in favor of doing the necessary pieces of the public input and the shared revenue, and to possibly move more departments to next week if we could come back again.
That's kind of where I was leaning to, Gabriella. And Sherry, did you have something?
No, I agree. I didn't realize we were scheduled until 9:30. That was not my understanding.
Okay. So if the panel is okay with us taking the doing the public hearing for state shared revenue and then doing the citizens in that order?
That's fine.
Okay, I'm fine.
Okay, let's do that. So for right now, we're holding off in advance the questions for the department directors, and I'm moving into item E, the public hearing state shared revenue. Nate, go ahead and give us some.
That's be Neil Obringer, so I'm going to turn my camera off.
Okay, go ahead, Neil.
Good evening, Mayor and Council and Budget Committee members. Let me just pull up a presentation here. Is everybody able to see my webcam okay?
Yeah.
So is that in the total budget, or is that a separate document?
The state shared revenue is included as part of the general fund and special revenue fund revenue sources. There wouldn't be a separate document, but I will pull up a presentation here shortly. So the purpose of the state shared revenue public hearing is to provide the community for an opportunity to review the uses of state shared revenue, ask questions, and provide any comment that they might have. All the committee has to do tonight is provide the public that opportunity by opening a public hearing on this item. As you can see, there are a range of revenue sources. Yes.
Your display is getting cut off, at least on my view. So it's cut off at the FY20 amended.
I'm sorry, that's one of the challenges here of being an organizer. Is that better?
No.
Let's.
There you go. There it is.
How is that?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. So as you can see, the state shared revenue sources come to the city and are receipted into both the general fund. Those come in the form of liquor apportionment, cigarette, state revenue sharing, which is an alternative or another source of liquor apportionment, and marijuana apportionment. And then there is an additional marijuana, state marijuana apportionment that comes into 204. So those are at a high level, the state shared revenue sources. I'll take any questions that you might have, but at this point, once we get done with any questions, I would just ask that the committee open a public hearing on this item.
I can do that. Is there any questions regarding this revenue fund? Shared revenue. Okay, so I would like to open the public hearing for the state shared revenue. Any comments from the public?
I show no request to speak from the virtual audience.
Oh, thank you. Anybody, any live persons that want to speak to this?
We have none tonight.
Okay. So that being said, I'm going to close the public hearing. And is this an action item, Nate, for us?
Well, I believe that since we've done this, we could still put off the motion until we do all the motions at the end of most likely next Tuesday. Correct me if I'm wrong, Neil.
So there is no other action required on this item. At this point, all we need to do is open and hold a public hearing. The council, when the budget actually comes for adoption in June, will take final action on the state shared revenue and basically take the final action required to make the city eligible to receive these resources.
Okay. That being said, then we will, it is 8:20. We can move on to the next item. Nate, so we can move forward if everybody's okay with that for a while, or we can close this hearing at this point, or this is a kind of a turning point.
Yeah, so close the hearing for state shared revenue, and then we can move on to business from the audience.
Right. I closed the public hearing on it already, so we can go ahead and do the business from the audience.
Chair, we have 3 individuals that are in attendance virtually who would like to provide comment. The first is Alexandria Dreyer, and I am going to unmute her microphone now.
Okay.
Thank you very much. This is
You're
Alex
welcome.
Dreyer. I
Please,
am a
hold
Lane
on,
County.
please. Hold on. Are you there? So,
Yes.
okay, go ahead and please state your name and your mailing address, and you have 3 minutes for comment.
This is Alexandria Dreyer. I'm Lane County staff. I live at 1600 City View Street in Eugene. I wanted to provide some context for the Human Services Commission budget request that was in your packet. And I understand that while COVID-19 is projected to have significant impacts on local revenue, the economic impact of COVID-19 is exacerbated for those who have lost employment and income during this time, especially people who live paycheck to paycheck. So some of the Human Services Commission requests for the budget request in particular includes a 2% increase overall in programs, and the Human Services Commission, as Councilor Woodrow and Gabrielle Guidero, they're the members of the HSC who represent Springfield. They know it's a interjurisdictional group with City of Eugene staff, City of Eugene representatives, City of Springfield, and Lane County. So each jurisdiction is being asked to contribute to an additional 2% to the fund this in the next budget cycle, and that is to cover increasing costs basically in line with inflation, funding for HSC programs, which are anti-poverty programs including child abuse, parent education, the Community Service Center out of Catholic Community Services, and senior meal delivery that has been flat for many years. And we heard from service providers that that flat funding is not sustainable, especially with inflation. So essentially it's regressive anytime the dollar amount is flat. And there have been requests for ongoing increased funding due to rising costs. Some of those include at our community service center with Catholic Community Services. So for example, they lost a grant expired and they were no longer able to have an additional staff person at their food pantry. And that means that wait times for the food pantry can get up to 80 minutes. And part of the reason that we fund a community service center like Catholic Community Services is somebody comes in for a food box, but they're eligible for all these other programs that can help them achieve economic self-sufficiency. But when you've waited in line for 80 minutes just to get food, you are not interested in talking about other things you might be eligible for. You're ready to just go home. And we're seeing increased need for not only food boxes, but also those services. So having an additional staff person to process people more quickly would also help them to make sure people are getting all the services that they're eligible for. And the other request, just in general, that was in the Human Services Commission request was senior meal delivery. So this is Meals on Wheels for seniors 60 and older who are homebound. We're seeing an increased need due to COVID-19 for home delivery for meals, especially given that the elderly are a much more vulnerable population. And even prior to COVID-19, Meals on Wheels had identified that there's a need for an additional meal route in the city of Springfield that could serve 25 seniors every day with home delivered meals. And I just want to add that I appreciate the responsibility that you have in managing these dollars responsibly, especially given the COVID-19.
Excuse me, ma'am. Yeah, it's over the 3-minute mark.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input. Appreciate it. Who do we have next?
Next up is Dylan Lamar, and I'm going to unmute his microphone now.
Great, thank you very much.
Mr. Lamar, go ahead and state your full name and address, please.
Yeah, Dylan Lamar, and I'm at 55 West 27th Avenue in Eugene, Oregon. Thanks for your time this evening. It's been a nice civics lessons for me. So I'm with Cultivate Inc. I'm a developer architect that is interested in pursuing affordable housing. I've partnered with Square One Villages, and we are who does the tiny house villages around. And we have a property at C and 10th Street that we plan on developing a house and ADU on this summer. And we're trying to raise funds to make it an affordable housing project. It would be pretty innovative type of project where the homes would be shared and owned as a housing cooperative. The Square One would be a land trust for the property. And so the housing would be made permanently affordable. The co-op ownership opportunities would be permanently available to people at 60% of area median income, which is a very low income for ownership. We currently have are raising $440,000 from private social investors to fund construction. Square One Villages has about $100,000 they're bringing to the table from grants and other subsidies. And we have down payments coming from the homeowners. We're requesting $60,000 from the city budget committee. We're hoping this would be an interest-free loan that would support the purchase of the land on behalf of the community land trust. And in the event the land ever reverted to a market rate use, that loan would go back to the city. We've just missed the CDBG funding cycle, and so we're trying to figure out how to raise the subsidy dollars to make this affordable. We do plan on building this summer regardless, but we're trying to make it, as I said, an affordable homeownership opportunity and not just market rate. So I know you have a lot to consider given circumstances this year, so I appreciate your time. And I believe you all received a letter as well as a project description that I had emailed previously. So if you have any questions, my contact information is there, and feel free to let me know.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. So we have another person.
Next individual is Sarah Kinzer, and I'm unmuting her microphone now.
Hello, Ms. Kinzer. If you could start with your full name and address, we'd appreciate it. And you have 3 minutes to give us your comments. Hello?
It appears that Ms. Kinzer is self-muted.
There I am.
So there you are. Okay, well, if you can start with your name and address and for the record, and we'll go with your 3-minute testimony.
Sarah Bloom-Kinzer, 4018 Cherokee Drive in Springfield, and I'm here on behalf of Emerald Art Center. I am the current board president for 2020, and the Emerald Art Center is a place where we've had a beginning and established artists join together to create and showcase their art in a historic building in downtown Springfield. It's a place for community to view local and national art shows as well as attend classes and other events. With a vision to build a community engaging in and celebrating the arts, experiencing the joys of creative expression as well as communication. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we've been serving our community since 1957. And we're housed in a 100-year-old building on Main Street. We are financed through generous donations, associate supporting memberships, as well as workshops and lectures. And I speak tonight asking for the City of Springfield's help in continuing this amazing work. We've recently been made aware of 2 critical needs in our facility. The first involves faulty electrical inverters. We are required by code to have working inverters that will supply power to our exit signs in the case of a power outage, i.e. last Wednesday when we had a power outage, we had some snafus. And we have established these inverters are not working and have received an estimate of approximately $5,500 to $9,000, and we're going to stick with the middle price range. Finding out today that some might be able to help with us with replacement of fluorescents for LED.
the broken electronics and bring the building back up to code. In addition, we have identified a window leak via broken seal and is causing water leakage. We were informed that when the broken seal was discovered that the other windows also might be having broken seals, and this repair will be needed in order to competed in order for us to maintain our commitment to our renters to keep the building in good repair. The estimated cost of fixing the seals is approximately $6,500 to $6,800. And I'm speaking to you tonight as representative of Emerald Arts Center to ask for the city's assistance in allocating the funding needed in the 2021 budget to support our continued efforts in bringing important life-changing opportunities and culture to the city of Springfield. Ideally, we are requesting approximately $12,000 for use in replacing the Emerald Arts Center's broken electrical inverters and for resealing the windows to prevent water damage and mold damage from occurring. We appreciate your time and consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you're saying that the total is 12,000, you said?
Yes, I actually just got another bid today from Brabham, and they included the removal of our current CPI unit, which requires battery and or metal. It's a big housing unit of approximately 10 12-volt batteries, and that included the cost of removing that and disposing of it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Anything else? Any questions for anyone from the panel? Okay. Thank you very much for the testimony.
I do have a question. I'm sorry, Joe.
Okay.
I forget that I'm muted. My question has to do with, is there a presentation about the Emerald Arts Center that we received? Was there something that we received about that?
I believe there were some documents that were sent in.
So were they with, where would I find those? I have not been able to find them.
So Nate?
This is Neil. The city has not, the budget email, which was the location that the public would send in information in advance. We did not receive anything from the Emerald Arts Center.
Oh, I apologize. Okay.
Okay. So I was just wondering if we could have some form of written information prior to our making a decision about the budget next week.
Yeah, I would have a tendency to agree with you.
Still there?
Yes, I'm still here. I was waiting to be unmuted. Yes, I have a copy of the bids for the window leakage repair, and the big part of that is permits to have a lift put on the sidewalk in order to place it. It is a south-facing window on the D suite upstairs on our 3rd floor, and then also I have 3 bids anywhere from just over $3,000 up to $9,000, but not all of the bids include replacement or removal of the CPI unit, and the most recent bid did cover that.
And if you could summarize that and send that in, we would appreciate it. And I would have one question on top of that, now that you mention it. You said that there's a permit required for the lift, and how much is that permit?
I do not know. That was something that was included in the bid suggested by Brinkers Restoration Contractors, and it just says equipment, labor, materials, permits, and fees, approximately $968.50 was their bid for fixing the window leaks.
Okay. If there's a possibility for just for my edification, find out how much, have them break the permit costs off of that and see how much it would be if those permits costs are, if that's paid to the city, and maybe the city can work on that direction to help.
It does give a breakdown. It says application prep, encroachment permits, admin fees, additional fees for safety plan, and signs is included in that $968.50.
Great. Well, I'm just wondering how much the permit itself costs.
Got you. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions for her? Excellent. We are at 8:35, and at this time, we're done with the public business from the audience.
Chair?
Yes?
We actually have one more individual with their hand raised.
Oh, I apologize. Let's go with that.
The next individual is Vonnie Mickelson, and I'm unmuting her now.
Okay. Hello, if you could state your name and address. And
yes, thank you.
3 minutes or less, Bonnie.
Yes, sir. Bonnie Mickelson, Springfield Chamber of Commerce, 101 South A Street. I'm also a proud resident of Springfield, and thank you for allowing me to chime in here last minute. I hadn't needed to, but I think it's important, first of all, to thank the Budget Committee for the hard work, the many hours that you're putting into reviewing this so thoroughly. Also to our council, in consideration to the service contracts with the partnership Spring Chamber of Commerce. Say we, as a small nonprofit organization, impacts our revenues. We happen to be very hard years. Steward our bringing us to a place we are to weather the early access, and we staff. I will that I see my peers across the state that aren't so fortunate. I'm grateful for the fact that our community has supported the Chamber of Commerce for as long as they have. We have a great strategy in place. We're very focused. We're working extremely hard, 10, 12-hour days every day to help our businesses fully recover when we get on the other side of this. I will say the impact is as large as 10 to 20% of our total operating revenue. That's one FTE. I will do everything in my power. We got some good news on a grant we received to help us through that. We are continuing to pay our obligations to the city on the lease of the depot. We're very grateful for that place. We hope to be back there soon. When the doors open. And honestly, I just want to call out the incredible work that I have seen day in and day out from our city. And I'm very, very grateful and appreciative of the efforts scenes every day, 100%. And as a result of that, we're getting some incredibly positive feedback from our community, from our small businesses, and a lot of confidence that they're going to be able to weather this on the other side. We'll continue to do our best to do that. So once again, thank you to city staff, to city council, and to the volunteers on this budget review committee for the work that you're doing, your stewardship of our local taxpayers' dollars. And I'll leave it at that. I hope I didn't do 3 minutes. I missed those big 3-minute time cards that you other meetings. Thank you, Chair Kushner.
Thank you, Bonnie. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so Nate, where are we going from here?
All right. I did look at the invite. While it's not in the materials, the invite did have till 9:30, but it's really not a problem. It's already been over 3 hours, and it's been a long evening. We could decide to adjourn for the evening and pick this up again at 5:30 next Tuesday. I'll leave it up to all of you at this point.
I'd like to get I think we ought to go ahead and go across the panel and see if we can get some sort of collaboration here and consensus on what needs to be happening. Is there anybody that would like, how many put it this way, is there anybody that would like to continue forward with this meeting? Please signify by an aye.
Can I ask a question first?
Of course.
What do we have left to do?
Well, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
You still have, I think, additional questions for departments. I don't know if it's for all of them, but I did hear you had questions for development and public works.
Right.
There's also the library, IT, CMO, and the city attorney's office. And then after that, we're going to have the motions and deliberation process. So any adjustments that you want to make to this budget. And then it's just a matter of doing the motions. So okay. If there weren't a lot more questions for departments, we could wrap this up this evening. If there's a lot of conversation with departments, it's definitely going to roll into next Tuesday.
Yeah, I there's no reason to rush it.
Yeah. I think I agree, Marilee. I think that there's
Yes.
enough here. I don't want to rush people to shorten their questions or for the directors to be required to shorten their responses. So anybody in favor of?
May I
Go
make
ahead.
a motion to adjourn?
Well, it's not a motion item.
It's not a motion to adjourn?
I'm just getting a quick hand vote on what people want to do, and then we can go with that. Oh, it's the same thing. Go ahead. You can make a motion. That's fine. Same 6-1
So
up. Doesn't matter.
I move that we adjourn and reconvene next Tuesday.
I'm sorry, if you don't mind, Neil Adati would like to pop up really quick.
Please.
Sorry about that. Councilor Pictionary, I wanted to confirm something that Councilor Moore asked earlier, did a little research, but the document that was on the screen mentioned that the 25,000 for the Chamber of Commerce was from the general fund. It's actually from TRT, Transit Room Tax Fund, so I wanted to clarify that. And then in reading the contract while I was here, there is specifically called out in the job description the indoor track. So I wanted to just make sure while the position may do other things, it is from TRT, it is worded in the contract, and I wanted to make sure that we followed up on that for Councilor Moore since that was her question.
So could I possibly see a copy of that contract? Is that something that we passed, we voted on in council?
We can get that to you, Councilor Moore.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's a motion to
adjourn
extend this meeting to next Tuesday and adjourning tonight.
I would second that.
Okay, calling for a vote. All in favor signify by aye.
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 Anybody opposed signify same. Motion carries unanimously. So thank you very much, Nate. We're going